Yield 90 seconds to my good friend, the distinguished lady from Puerto Rico, Ms. Gonzalez.
Thank you.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you, Chairman McGovern, for your leadership and this opportunity. As the only member representing Puerto Rico in this Congress, I represent 3.2 million American citizens living on the island. And there are 5.4 million Puerto Ricans living in the mainland. So today, while we are discussing this resolution that will give delegates and the resident commissioner the opportunity to vote in the Committee of the Whole, one issue that triggers me being here is that our vote would only count if the cast votes are not deciding votes. So we can vote in the Committee of the Whole as the rules it's providing, but if the casting votes are in contest, then you need to do a second round of votes without the territories. And that is like a symbolic vote. And that's the reason the people of Puerto Rico want to become a state. That's the only way we can achieve 4 members of Congress representing Puerto Rico in the House, 2 members on the Senate side, not just using a symbolic vote in this House. As a matter of an example, a few minutes ago, our names, the territories delegates' names were on the board. We can't vote in regular bills. We can't vote in anything else. So it will look like we are not present during the debates. It will look like we are not present in this floor of the House whenever there's a real discussion in this floor, but our name's still there. We can vote yes, we can vote no. So.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will yield back the balance of my time, but I think it's not a symbolic vote. This is a good step, but we should have the full right votes. Thank you.
The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I want to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record a statement on the interpretation of Clause 8 of Rule 2.
Without objection.
And I'd also like to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record a list of all members and caucuses who offered ideas and proposals for House Resolution 6 and thank these members for their contributions.
Without objection.
And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson-Lee.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
I thank the chairman of the Rules Committee, and I thank the team and all of the opportunities that we had to engage in this rule package. It is a new day, Mr. Speaker, and a new day because I am glad that we have opened some opportunity for our delegates and commissioners to be able to participate on behalf of their millions of constituents, of which did not occur under Republican rule. That is a wonderful new step. But I do acknowledge the fact that we are $2 trillion in debt, and the deficit has increased under this administration. And here we are now asking for $5.2 billion for a border wall. I am glad that this rules package is transparent and fiscally responsible. But I am most excited about the responsibility for the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. Because unfortunately, my state, the state of Texas, is leading an ill-fated legislative initiative, litigation that would undermine the right to Americans to have good health care. It will undermine the protection for those with pre-existing condition. It will undermine the fact that Texas was the poster child for uninsured Americans. 25% of our state was uninsured. And this legislation indicates that our speaker can intervene on any legislation and or litigation that interferes with or undermines protecting the American people's health care. That is what they voted for. That is why they sent us to the United States Congress. That is why we are here. And for the many people that suffer, that I see in my district, again, the poster child for uninsured Americans, now we have in this rules package the ability of our speaker to stand up for the American people and to fight for the health care that they so desire. So if there's anything in here that I can support, and there are many, many things of transparency, the fact that we now can stand up to protect the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act is one for this nation. It is a new day, and our people will survive because of that. I yield back.
The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield 90 seconds to my good friend, distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Burgess.
The gentleman is recognized.
I thank the gentleman from Oklahoma and congratulate him on being the ranking member of the Rules Committee. Congratulate the new chairman of the Rules Committee. I do speak in opposition to the rule. This authorization for the Speaker of the House to intervene in any lawsuit, particularly the one in Texas, is not a good idea, not something that I think we should be pursuing. Look, the Affordable Care Act has multiple problems. We're forcing people to buy insurance they can't afford, don't understand, and can't use. They're functionally uninsured, and they're out a ton of money to do that. In addition, the work requirements that the Department of Agriculture is working on, after the Farm Bill was passed. This is something that is important for the administration. We have more jobs than we have workers. People should be working, and it is time to get people back to work. Finally, the removal of the addition of the Gephardt rule, but the removal of the requirement that the Senate concur to the House budget before the Gephardt rule goes into effect. This is a dangerous policy and one this House ought to reject. I thank the gentleman for yielding. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman in the back. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
How much time I have left, Mr. Speaker?
The gentleman from Massachusetts has 1 minute and 3/4.
Okay, I'm going to reserve my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
May I make the same inquiry as to my time, Mr. Speaker?
The gentleman from Oklahoma has 8 minutes remaining.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. With that, I want to yield 90 seconds to my good friend, the distinguished gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Estes.
The gentleman is recognized.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong opposition to House Resolution 6. Among many rule changes included, this bill opens the door for Democrats to raise taxes by removing the current requirement of a 3/5 majority of the House of Representatives to pass a tax increase. At a time when our nation's debt is $22 trillion, increasing taxes and government spending will only succeed in further bankrupting our children and grandchildren. For generations, Americans have worked to leave the country better off for their kids and grandkids. Mortgaging our kids' future will not do that. Following implementation of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, our economy has experienced historic growth. Instead of building upon that progress, this bill would allow the Democrats to raise taxes with a simple majority vote, stopping our economy in its tracks. It's a shame that my colleagues have spent their first day in a majority seeking to change the rules to allow for tax and debt increases. Once this bill is passed, it's all but certain that the Democrats will then use the mechanisms to raise taxes on families in Kansas and across our nation to pay for increased government spending. This is a dangerous precedent that should be widely opposed, and I urge my colleagues to vote against this bill. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from
Mr. Speaker, I just remind the gentleman, in the last 2 years, the Republicans have exploded the debt by $2 trillion. I reserve my
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. May I inquire, my friend? I'm prepared to close whenever my friend is. Okay. Thank you, Mr.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In closing, I want to begin by urging all members to oppose this measure. While the rule package includes some provisions Republicans can certainly support, it unfortunately includes too many provisions that we cannot. The rule package today removes important fiscal responsibility measures from House rules, establishes a partisan climate committee, grants the Speaker the power to intervene in a lawsuit over the legality of the ACA. Those are all things that my conference, quite frankly, is unanimously opposed to. I do want to address, just in passing, my friend's discussion about the deficit. And I'll remind him, when President Obama was in office, that deficit was doubled, actually increased at a faster rate, particularly when my friends were empowered in the first opening 2 years than it ever has at any peacetime in American history. The deficit is all too high. I agree with my friends very much on that. I'm glad they're born-again deficit hawks. That means they're going to be serious about entitlement reform, because we all know what drives the deficit here, and that's simply the demographic reality of an aging population and an overextended bunch of entitlements. And I invite my friends, I actually have a bipartisan bill, which I would encourage my friends to look at, which doesn't dictate an outcome, but actually sets up the same sort of process that Democrats and Republicans worked on together in 1983, the last time Social Security was at risk, came to a bipartisan compromise, developed something that restored the fiscal sanity. That's legislation my friend in the former Congress, Mr. Delaney, and I had for 3 Congresses. We could never get anybody interested in it on either side of the aisle. So if my friends want to engage in a virtuous debate about dealing with a deficit, I am all for it. I actually have a bipartisan remedy that I would invite them to look at, and I think it would yield us a very good result and start us down that road. But that's for another day. I want to end on a positive note. And I again want to congratulate my friend from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, on his elevation as chairman of the Rules Committee. I know very much from having worked with him for many years that he will keep his word. He always has. That he will operate in a manner that is above board and that is fair and respectful to all, that he will seriously do what he's committed to do. That is, entertain suggestions from all quarters. I actually have no doubt that he will do that way, and I genuinely look forward to having the opportunity to work with him on the committee that he chairs during the next 2 years. He's going to do certainly not only a good job for the people of his conference, but I believe a good job for the people of this institution and for the American people as well. So, Mr. Speaker, despite my affections, I do urge a no vote on the previous question, no on the underlying measure, yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself the remaining time. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the gentleman from Oklahoma for his kind words, and I hope he knows how much I respect him and how much I admire him. You know, Mr. Speaker, there were so many people who played a role in crafting these rules, from our history-making speaker, who gave us the opportunity to solicit member feedback, and the many colleagues who spoke with me about their suggestions, to the Office of the Parliamentarian and the Office of Legislative Counsel, to our incredible rules staff. You know, all gave made important contributions to this package. I want to thank everyone for their involvement. The work and dedication made these historic rules possible. Look, we have a unique moment here to implement real reforms, to say no to business as usual, and create a better legislative process, and make progress on the majority's agenda while making this House look like the real world. Let's seize this opportunity. I urge all my colleagues to vote yes on this package. Let's restore integrity to this place and get to work on behalf of the people we represent. And that is not just the view of the majority. I know that many in the minority share that view. We can do better. I look forward to working with the gentleman from Oklahoma and others on the Republican side of the aisle as we move forward in this new session. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I urge everybody to vote yes on this great rules package, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Oklahoma. Did you yield back? Okay. Thank you so much. Pursuant to House Resolution 5, the previous question is ordered on the portion of the divided question comprising Title I. The question is on that portion of that divided question. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed? The ayes have it.
Speaker, on that I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring the vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
On this vote, the ayes are 234, the nays are 197. The portion of the divided question compromising Title I is agreed to. And without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Section 3 of House Resolution 5, further proceedings will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, by direction of the Democratic Caucus, I offer a privileged resolution and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 7, resolution resolved that the following named members be and are hereby elected to the following standing committees of the House of Representatives. 1.
Consent that the resolution be considered as read and printed in the record.
Without objection, the resolution is agreed to and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Wyoming seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, by direction of the Republican Conference, I offer a privileged resolution and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 8, resolved that the following...
Ask unanimous consent that the resolution be considered as read and printed in the record.
Without objection, the resolution is agreed to and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material on H.R. 21, and further, that I may insert in the congressional record today such material as I may deem explanatory of H.R. 21.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 5, I call up H.R. 21 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 21, a bill making appropriations for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2019, and for other purposes.
Pursuant to House Resolution 5, the gentlewoman from New York, Mrs. Lowy, and the gentlewoman from Texas, Mrs. Granger, will control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from New York, Mrs. Lowy.
Madam Speaker, as this new Congress begins our work for the American people, I thank my colleagues for the honor of electing me chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee. I would also like to congratulate my colleague and friend Kay Granger on becoming ranking member. I look forward to working with her and all of the members of our committee and this House in the 116th Congress. For the first time in our nation's history, however, we convene this new Congress during a federal government shutdown. Now, in its 13th day, the Trump shutdown has disrupted life for more than 800,000 federal employees and their families, including nearly 400,000 people serving our country without pay. The shutdown has undermined public safety, halted consumer protection programs, and made it harder for the government to serve farmers, home buyers, and small business owners. The devastating impact on international security and assistance initiatives includes halting counter-drug, anti-crime, and border security efforts, preventing the obligation of funding for anti-terrorism assistance, cutting off foreign military financing, and stopping all new activities related to global health, such as anti-malaria and HIV/AIDS treatments, as well as maternal mortality care. As representatives, funding the federal government is one of our most important duties. When Congress allows a president to dictate ridiculous demands and lets petty partisanship prevent the timely passage of appropriation bills, we advocate that responsibility. Our new Democratic majority was elected to end the chaos and govern responsibly. This legislative package to end the Trump shutdown and fully reopen government consists of two parts: separating this agreement between President Trump and Congress over border security from funding the rest of the federal government. The first part, the one we are considering now, provides full-year funding for 6 of the 7 fiscal year 2019 appropriation bills that have not yet been completed. The text is virtually identical to bipartisan legislation that has already passed the Senate Appropriation Committee nearly unanimously, and in 4 cases passed the full Senate on a 92-6 vote. These bills are not perfect, but they make key investments in bipartisan priorities, do not include any poison pill riders, and increase funding for important programs by $53 billion more than President Trump's budget request. The second part of our legislative package, which will be presented shortly by our distinguished Homeland Security Appropriation Subcommittee Chairwoman, Lucille Roybal Allard, includes a continuing resolution funding the Department of Homeland Security at current levels through February 8th. It would allow the department to reopen without providing any new funding for President Trump's wasteful border wall. I urge my colleagues to pass both bills, and I urge the Senate to act responsibly and take up these bills without delay. It is up to Senate Republicans whether to vote for their own bills and reopen the government, or block them and continue the Trump shutdown. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, today I rise in opposition to H.R. 21. After months of good faith negotiations to resolve the differences between the House, the Senate, and the White House, the new Democrat leadership has chosen to introduce this package that fails to secure our border. The President has said that he will not sign it. The Senate has said they will not consider it. This plan not only ignores one of the main responsibilities of the Congress, which is to protect the American people, it ignores the will of this chamber by eliminating House members' involvement in the appropriations process. All members of the House, both Democrats and Republicans, have priorities and concerns that are not addressed in this bill. Our constituents are not well served by us simply rubber stamping a Senate product that has no chance of becoming a law. By accepting this bill, we're throwing away important House priorities such as resources to help federal law enforcement better investigate and prosecute groups such as terrorists, drug traffickers, human traffickers, violent criminals, and criminal aliens. It also ignores more than $300 million in funding for embassy security at a time when security threats overseas remain high and countless facilities are in need of important upgrades. The bill also strips vital protections for the rural poor that House members on both sides of the aisle have been fighting to secure for years. And these are just a few examples, Madam Speaker. All of us in this chamber were elected to represent the best interests of our constituents. This bill does not meet those standards. If my colleagues on the other side of the aisle truly care about the needs of their constituents, federal employees, and keeping the government operating, they shouldn't be wasting time on bills that will not be enacted. Instead, we should come together to find a solution that represents the will of both the House and the Senate. It's time to end the political gamesmanship and get to work on a bill that will reopen the government and fund border security. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this bill before us today, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from New York, the chairman-designate of the Commerce, Justice, Science Subcommittee, Mr. Serrano.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and congratulations on your chairmanship. Congratulations, Ms. Granger, on her ranking membership. As a top Democrat on the CJS subcommittee, let me tell you about what is happening right now at the Department of Justice, Department of Commerce, NASA, and the many other agencies under my subcommittee's jurisdiction as a result of the Trump shutdown. More than 95,000 employees at the Department of Justice, including the FBI, DEA, ATF, Federal Bureau of Prisons, and U.S. Marshals, are currently working without pay. More than 96% of NASA employees are now not working, imperiling scientific achievement. More than 86% of the Department of Commerce is furloughed without pay, including employees at key economic development agencies like the Economic Development Administration and the Minority Business Development Administration. Law enforcement training programs have been stopped. The Department of Justice civil litigation efforts against bad actors are severely limited. Payments to crime victims are not occurring. These are real-life consequences to the President's temper tantrum. This is basic governance that the Republican Party seems incapable of doing. Instead of working out a compromise, they sent everybody home for the holidays. So Democrats are doing the work that the President and his party couldn't. We need the government reopened, and these bills provide a clear path in that regard and in that direction. The CJS portion of this bill provides important investments to the Census Bureau, the Justice Department, NASA, and the National Science Foundation, among others. It also rejects some of the President's worst and most partisan policy proposals, including efforts to undermine climate research, eliminate economic development programs, and eliminate the Legal Services Corporation. It also gives the Senate no excuses. The CJS portion of this bill was approved by the Senate Appropriations Committee by a partisan vote of 30-1. It would be great to get approved by the Senate if Majority Leader McConnell were to bring it up for a vote, and it would pass, we feel, very easily. We're all elected in order to solve the pressing problems of our nation. Right now, the President doesn't seem interested in doing the same. But with this package, we're asking Senate Republicans, will you join us in helping the American people? Lastly, so much of this is tied up against the wall. Many people discuss the actual physical structure of the wall. I speak about something else. This country, this country, of all countries in the world, should never build a wall. This country that has a statue in New York Harbor saying, "Bring me your tired and your poor," should not be building a wall to keep some other people out. It is just not who we are. It is not who we should become. And I think that the President should realize that this is a losing battle because he's not going to get the money he wants to build that wall. Thank you.
The gentlewoman from New York reserves. The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Adderholt.
The gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. And Madam Speaker, I rise to oppose the FY19 appropriations package that is before us tonight, as what I believe it fails to reflect the priorities of the elected members of this body here in the House of Representatives. The House Agricultural Appropriation Bill, which I chaired as the Ag Subcommittee Chairman, it was bipartisan. I worked with my colleague, the Democrat ranking member, a good friend from Georgia, Sanford Bishop, on the bill, but unfortunately the bill in front of us tonight is basically, as some would say, a nothing burger. It is largely missing any substance. Let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about. The House bill that we negotiated contained $125 million more than the Senate bill for broadband pilot program. That is a program that is widely popular among rural America. The House bill provided $149 million more for the Food and Drug Administration. The House bill protected our children by excluding chicken from China and our children's school meals. The House bill reflected my work with Representative Clyburn of South Carolina to secure set-aside funds for persistent poverty as it continues in rural area. But tonight's package does not include these priorities. Also, they don't protect the border, which is one of the most basic duties of the federal government, and certainly one of the basic duties that the President must make sure that he does is protect our nation against the foreign enemies. Among the illegal immigrants who make their way across the southern border include gang members, they're human traffickers, they're child smugglers, they're drug dealers, and they by stopping their entry at the border, it prevents them from committing crimes in the United States. So instead of catering to voters who don't even want to have a border, I believe the House Democrats should vote no on this bill, and the Democrat majority should negotiate an end to the government shutdown and simply provide the funding requested by the President of the United States. Madam Speaker, I ask my colleagues to vote no on this appropriation bill tonight, and insist on a bill that includes the House priorities, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, before I yield to my friend, the gentleman from North Carolina, I would like to address a comment that my friend, Mr. Adderholt, made. The bill that passed through your committee also included language that would make it easier, as it is today, for youngsters to use e-cigarettes. So perhaps when we get back to it, we could address that. And now I would like to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, the chairman-designate of the Transportation, Housing, Urban Development Subcommittee, Mr. Price.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of the legislation to reopen the government and end this third Trump shutdown. For the last 2 weeks, President Trump has held America hostage to fulfill his demagogic campaign promise to build a border wall, a wall that has come to symbolize extreme and inhumane immigration policies that are simply tearing our communities apart. This is more than just a political fight. The Trump shutdown has closed federal agencies and suspended essential programs that millions of Americans rely upon. It's created uncertainty for families, businesses, and communities in each of our districts. To those federal employees affected by this unnecessary shutdown, know this. The President and his privileged cronies may not care about how you and your families pay your bills, but this new Democratic majority certainly does care. As the incoming chairman of the Transportation and Housing Appropriations Subcommittee, I know this uncertainty has severe consequences. Already, vital funding for states and municipalities to upgrade transit, rail, and aviation facilities are being put on hold. The National Transportation Safety Board has ceased major accident investigations. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration is no longer investigating or reviewing information about motor vehicle manufacturing defects. That could put lives at risk. Disaster recovery programs at FEMA and other agencies have been slowed due to the lapse in funding. Survivors of these disasters in North Carolina and other states, they're still recovering from devastating hurricanes, wildfires, and typhoons, and they simply cannot afford this delay and this uncertainty. New hiring and training for air traffic controllers has ceased, exacerbating an ongoing staffing shortage. If the shutdown continues much longer, housing assistance for millions of low-income families, veterans, seniors, the disabled will be jeopardized. And the list, Madam Speaker, goes on and on. President Trump and the Republicans may have gotten us into this mess, but Democrats are ready to clean it up on day one, namely right this minute. The funding package before us consists of appropriations bills that previously passed the Senate on a bipartisan basis. It reflects key Democratic and Republican priorities and rejects partisan policy riders. In a few minutes, separate legislation will provide short-term funding for the Department of Homeland Security. That will give us more time to negotiate and find a solution on border security and immigration policy. Now, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have been quoted as calling this a stunt or a non-starter. Madam Speaker, how is legislation that passed the Senate with 92 votes a stunt? How can bills the Trump administration itself praised in its official statement of administration policy just a few months ago praise the bill? How is that a non-starter? Enough is enough. President Trump may see this as a reality show game of chicken, but this shutdown is for real and it's doing real damage. Let's do the right thing for the American people. Let's reopen the government without further delay. I urge my colleagues to support this bipartisan common sense legislation finally to end the Trump shutdown.
New York reserves. The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Rogers.
The gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the ranking member. Tonight there will be a smoke and mirrors vote on this House floor. Democrats want to kick the can down the road and put American security on the back burner while they gear up their obstructionist agenda. It used to be that members of Congress could put partisanship aside, at least on national security issues. I know this firsthand as a member of both the Armed Services Committee and Homeland Security Committees, where we have done this on a regular basis. But today the Democrats and the Speaker refuse to even negotiate funding a deal to deal with a critical national security issue. Unfortunately, it looks like we are in for a Democrat agenda influenced by the far-left echo chamber that promotes open borders and illegal immigration. Not too long ago, then-Senator Barack Obama spoke in support of securing the southern border and the need to deter illegal immigration. The bill he supported authorized the construction of a physical barrier along the southern border that would prevent illegal entry into the United States. It passed the Senate with 80 votes. 80 votes that included Senator Barack Obama, Senator Biden, Senator Clinton, and Senator Schumer. What changed? Since when did securing our border become controversial? The election of Donald Trump. Democrats seem willing to ignore security vulnerabilities along our border on their quest to win back the White House in 2020. Their plan is to block President Trump's priorities, even those that they used to support, and then act like Republicans are the reason they can't get things done. Today's funding bill stands no chance in the Senate or with President Trump. So I challenge the Democrats, my Democrat colleagues, to get something good done for the American people rather than engaging in the political grandstanding that this bill signifies. I hope Speaker Pelosi won't let the activist left hold American security hostage. Securing our border is not only the right thing to do, but it's what the American people sent us here to do. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
The gentlewoman reserves.
Madam
The gentlewoman
Speaker,
from New York is recognized.
I am very pleased to yield 4 minutes to the gentlewoman from Minnesota, the chair designate of the Interior Subcommittee, Ms. McCollum.
The gentlewoman from Minnesota is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of this bill to reopen the government. As the Trump shutdown ends its 13th day, we're seeing the damage it's inflicting on our country. Our national parks, America's crown jewels, are under threat from vandalism and unmanaged visitation. The Interior Department is charged with preserving our public lands for all Americans to enjoy, but the current lack of supervision in our parks, it's damaging, and the very resources that the government is supposed to protect are at risk. Just this past weekend, it was reported that Yosemite National Park became overwhelmed by garbage and other human waste piling up along the roads. Leaving these parks accessible without adequate National Park Service staffing puts the public at risk. On Christmas Eve at Big Bend National Park, a man broke his leg while hiking, and because of the shutdown, emergency services were not available. Thankfully, Good Samaritans found the man and carried him down the trail. Luckily, they met one of the few park rangers deemed essential, who was continuing to work without pay during this shutdown. The ranger carried the man on his back for 2 hours to safety. Now, this story had a positive ending, but it could have been tragic, and this is just one story. The shutdown is creating uncertainty for our families, businesses, and communities. More than 800,000 federal employees aren't getting paid. Vital services are being disrupted. Some small businesses with government contracts are being forced to consider to lay off their employees. The ripple effects from this shutdown is damaging our economy. And then there's the vital work of the Environmental Protection Agency. It has furloughed more than 13,000 employees, halting inspections at drinking water systems, hazardous waste management, and chemical facilities. Well, this is just unacceptable to America's public health. It leaves our American people in jeopardy. The Trump shutdown is particularly threatening to the health and safety of our Native American brothers and sisters. Once again, we have failed to meet our commitments to tribal nations as a delay in government funding continues. Every day, basic services like health clinics, schools, and food assistance for our seniors are being put at risk for nearly 1.9 million Americans throughout Indian country. Federal employees, first responders, are putting their lives on the line without pay. It is unconscionable to put people's lives at risk. We must open this government. Responsibly funding the government is one of Congress's most important duties, and Republicans fail to meet this obligation, and they have allowed President Trump to peddle chaos. Democrats are ready to end the Trump shutdown. This bill is nearly identical to the legislation that has already received overwhelming bipartisan support in the Senate. It reflects the priorities of the American people by rejecting President Trump's proposed budget cuts and program eliminations, and including the poison pill writers. The second bill we'll consider today, the Homeland Security Bill, will create space for negotiation on immigration policy and border security, something Democrats do support strongly. After the House passes these bills, the Senate will have a choice. Pass the bills they previously voted for and end the shutdown, or reject them and leave the government closed. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Graves.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, and I thank the gentlelady from Texas. And Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition of this bill that's before us tonight. Unfortunately, this 116th Congress has begun under the cloud of a government shutdown. The prosperity and security of our nation, they're just taking a back seat to the new Democrat majority's political agenda. While President Trump has asked for modest and reasonable funding to secure our border, Democrats have blocked this deal, one that would have fully funded the government several weeks ago, even before Christmas. The president's request was normal and it was necessary. But what's really not necessary is the level of the anti-Trump hysteria that's come from the left. The first order of business in this new Congress should be to secure the border and, yes, to open the government. The president is willing to strike a deal, but he just needs a few Democrats to join him at the table and put our country before the new Democrat majority's politics. Sadly, the bill on the floor today does nothing to secure our border, nor does it strengthen our nation's security. The bill before us is nothing more than just a political stunt. And if you still don't believe me, I'll just point out that this bill does not include any of the bipartisan product that my committee put together last year with the help of Congressman Mike Quigley on the Financial Services Approach Subcommittee, which included more than 100 pages of bipartisan product that we worked together on. None of these reforms were included. And it also included the Fund for America's Kids and Grandkids, which is a revolutionary idea to save money for the future generations. But just hours ago, in her acceptance speech, the Speaker referred to the children of this great country and securing their futures. So why doesn't this bill, the one that's before us tonight, include anything for America's kids and grandkids? Furthermore, this bill is nothing more than a Senate bill. The Speaker of the House is supposed to fight for the House position and not just be a floor leader for the Senate majority. I urge my friends on the other side of the aisle to put politics aside. Let's come to the table. Let's get this done. Working together, we can secure the border, we can protect the citizens of this country, and yes, we can reopen this government. The American people are counting on us. That's what they elected us to do here today. I urge a no vote on this bill. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, before I introduce Mr. Bishop, I just want to say to the gentleman from Georgia, I strongly believe we have a responsibility to keep the government open. So it's really unfortunate that the president has taken a strong position in closing the government down. So I hope we can continue our discussions and open the government for the American people. And Madam Speaker, I'm very pleased to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, the chairman-designate of the Agricultural Subcommittee, Mr. Bishop.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 4 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. Madam Speaker, we are now in the 13th day of a partial government shutdown. Vital government services that the public relies on have slowed or stopped altogether. Specifically, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has stopped issuing loans for rural development and grants for housing and community facilities. New grant payments for agriculture research cannot be made. Across the nation, Farm Service Agency county offices closed on December 28th. Furthermore, farmers applying for relief from retaliatory tariffs are in limbo, waiting for the shutdown to end. The bill before us today is a serious effort to end this needless shutdown and get the government back to work for the American people. The agriculture section is virtually identical to the legislation that the Senate passed last August by a vote of 92-6. This impressive bipartisan vote is the result of the Senate agreeing to work constructively to develop their bills. This bill is not perfect. No bill ever is. But again, this is a serious bill that will get the government working again for the American people. Not only are we in the middle of a needless shutdown, but we're already 4 months into the fiscal year 2019. Federal agencies and departments deserve certainty and stability. And as we begin a new Congress, I hope we can renew our commitment to a responsibly funded government. This bill provides $3.8 billion for rural development. These much-needed resources will help communities that face broadband, housing, water and wastewater, and health care challenges. The legislation provides an additional $425 million for rural broadband expansion, continuing our commitment to bridge the digital divide. It responsibly funds the McGovern-Dole and Food for Peace programs that provide essential food to help keep children in school and help feed hungry people abroad. It provides $2.7 billion in agriculture research, which is an increase of $114 million above FY18. It funds the Farm Service Agency at $1.6 million, and it funds Natural Resource Conservation Service at $879.1 million. The bill provides $73.2 billion in mandatory funding for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which will soon begin to run out of funding if action is not taken soon. Last year, SNAP helped more than 42 million people, and it's widely considered an efficient and successful safety net that offers desperately needed support to those in need. Finally, the Food and Drug Administration is funded at $2.97 billion, and the Commodities Future Trading Commission is funded at the requested level of $281.5 million. Farmers, ranchers, and producers go to work every morning. So should their government. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Mrs. Fox.
The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague from Texas for yielding. I rise today in opposition to H.R. 21, the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2019. This bill would allow taxpayers to fund abortions in foreign countries. H.R. 21 would repeal President Donald Trump's Protecting Life in Global Health Assistance policy. This important policy, formerly known as the Mexico City policy, protects American taxpayers and prohibits U.S. international assistance from going to foreign NGOs that promote or perform abortions. It is critical that America's foreign policy reflect the values of the American people. A 2017 mayor's poll clearly revealed that an overwhelming majority of Americans oppose using their hard-earned tax dollars to support abortions in other countries. American taxpayers should not be expected to pay for something they so strongly oppose. The Protecting Life and Global Health Assistance policy is not anti-global health, nor is it anti-family planning. It does not reduce funding available for international health assistance and leaves the choice up to the individual NGOs of whether or not they wish to be eligible for federal grant money. Abortion should never be considered a necessary part of economic growth, and organizations that believe it should not be the type of organizations that the United States partners with. Abortion is wrong. We do not allow taxpayer money to be spent on abortions within the United States, and we certainly should not fund it in other countries. I urge my colleagues to oppose this bill, and with that, I yield back.
The gentlelady reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, the distinguished chairman-designate of the Financial Services Subcommittee, Mr. Quigley.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the chairman-to-be of the Appropriations Committee. I'm reminding myself, after listening to my colleagues, really how we got here. Yes, this is a Senate bill. The Senate had a bicameral, bipartisan approach to this. They were told they could go home for a reason. And apparently the president saw something he didn't like on TV, and so here we are. And what do we have to show for it? 800,000 federal employees left wondering where their next paychecks are going to arrive, forced to choose between paying their mortgage or their child's daycare. Financial markets and businesses rattled by a president that's willing to throw the economy into chaos over his own pride. American families deprived of vital government services they rely on. As the chairman-designate of the Financial Services Subcommittee on Approps, I've seen firsthand how this shutdown is impacting communities around the country. For example, the doors to the Small Business Administration are shut. This means a complete halt to the processing of federal loan assistance applications for small businesses, which typically amount to $1 billion per month. We have more than 300 million small businesses in our communities, thousands of which apply every month for federal loan assistance, and we are failing them. We talk about supporting job creation and ensuring small businesses can grow, but when a business owner cannot get a loan approved, that is a broken promise. At the IRS, tens of thousands of employees who are supposed to be ready to answer taxpayers' questions and to process tax refunds are instead furloughed, leaving the phones to continue ringing unanswered as we move into the 2018 filing season. The Securities and Exchange Commission, the agency responsible for policing Wall Street, has furloughed 94% of its staff. It is now preparing to scale back law enforcement and litigation efforts, putting at risk the safety and stability of our markets. These are just 3 agencies. The list goes on. The bill that is before us today to fund the agencies covered by the Financial Service Appropriation Bill is not the bill I would have written myself. I'm disappointed that after securing funding last year to help states better defend their election system, we were unable to come to an agreement to lock down additional money for next year. The overwhelming demand for assistance is clearly there, as every single state and eligible territory requested funding. However, even though the President and many of my Republican colleagues refuse to do what's needed to defend our election systems from foreign interference, we must do what is right and what is responsible. That's why I'm still going to support this bill. Ultimately, it will do the foundational job the American people expect us to do. This bill provides resources for our core government operations to resume and function properly, whether it is the Federal Communications Commission, the National Archives, the Federal Judiciary, or federal drug control officers. It is time, 13 days past time, to end the ego trips and the nonsense and get back to work. I believe that we should always strive for bipartisanship when we can. That's exactly what the Senate did when they overwhelmingly passed the bills we're voting on tonight. But while I would never ask one of my colleagues, whether Democrat or Republican, to cave on their core convictions, that's exactly what the President and House Republicans are asking us to do by wasting over $5 billion on an ineffective border wall that has come to serve one purpose alone: to symbolize hate, exclusion, and irrational fear. This is clearly not how you negotiate a deal in good faith, and it's never appropriate to hold paychecks and vital government services hostage as a deal-making tactic. Stop covering for the President as he doubles down on his reckless mistake. Pass these Senate-supported bills and provide American families and businesses and communities with the certainty they deserve. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, Dr. Harris.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, and I thank the gentleman from Texas for yielding time. You know, Madam Speaker, we're less than 8 hours into this new Congress. We heard a promise from the chair today about transparency, openness, maybe regular order. Yet we have a bill in front of us, one of the most major bills we would consider the entire year, has not gone through the committee process. In fact, it was drawn up behind closed doors with no debate. We have dozens of new members, none of whom are allowed input into this product because it didn't come through the committee or the process. What are some of these changes that are made? Because we had a bill that had come through the process, but there were changes made. One of them the gentlelady from North Carolina talked about. The fact that many, many Americans, the majority of Americans, feel we already spend too much on foreign aid, and yet this bill says we are now going to change our policy from the last few years, and we are now going to spend money to fund abortion programs in foreign countries for the purpose of family planning. Not for medical purposes, for the purposes of family planning. Now, the vast majority of Americans would disagree and say, with a $22 trillion debt, we probably shouldn't be spending money overseas funding abortion for family planning. We may have gotten a chance to debate this in committee, but we didn't. Less than 8 hours into the session, we have a major bill on the floor, no debate, but it goes further than that. It restores funding to the United Nations Population Fund. Now, in committee, we should have had a debate about the United Nations Population Fund and how, in fact, it funds China's coercive forced sterilization and forced abortion policy. Now, is that what the United States is about? Sending money overseas for forced sterilization and forced abortion? That discussion belongs in committee. It doesn't belong, again, added to a bill under the dark of night with no discussion. Goes further. It increases funding for international family planning and encourages targeting areas of the world, quote, where population growth threatens biodiversity and endangered species. It doesn't mention anything about human life or the value of human life here. It talks about every other species in the environment as if they're more important than human life. A very interesting approach to take, but an approach that probably should have been discussed in committee first. And finally, as a physician, it removes the protective language that says that the District of Columbia should not, in fact, promote Jack Kevorkian-style physician-assisted suicide because, Madam Speaker, if you can't trust your physician to make each and every judgment in your best interest, not the interest of an HMO that can save money or an insurance company can save money or the organization that physician works for that can save money if that person agrees to take a suicide-producing drug prescribed by that physician. If we go down that slippery slope, I don't want to know where we end. Madam Speaker, this bill should have come through the committee process. It should have gone through the debate. I yield back my time.
Does the gentlewoman reserve? The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, before I yield to our next speaker, I'd like to remind the gentleman from Maryland that this bill was supported by Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, among other senators, so that therefore you might want to take up your issues with them. And I'm very pleased to yield to the gentleman from South Carolina, the Majority Whip, Mr. Clyburn. For 3 minutes.
How much time? Thank you. The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me thank the gentlelady for yielding me this time and thank her so much for her service to this great nation. Madam Chair, I rise in strong support of this bill to reopen the government. For the past 2 weeks, vital public services have been left undone and honorable public servants have been left unpaid. We must end the shameless shutdown. The Democratic majority has a disagreement with the President on whether a wall is the best way to secure our southern border and whether it would be productive to step toward fixing our broken immigration system. We will continue to debate the issue, as we should. But there is absolutely no reason why the federal government should not be serving the American people while we have done while we debate this issue. There's absolutely no reason why national parks shouldn't be maintained. There's absolutely no reason why museums should be closed. There is no reason why public officer training should cease. There's absolutely no reason why our economy should grow by $2 billion less every week, as economists have estimated. There's absolutely no reason why homeowners and small business owners shouldn't be able to receive loans in a timely manner. The American people voted for a divided government, but they did not vote for a defunct government. Over the next 2 years, we must not let our disagreements stop us from moving forward on issues where we do agree. Madam Leader, I have been spending a lot of time in recent weeks rereading a great book, Democracy in America, written by Alexis de Tocqueville. And although many historians disagree as to whether or not de Tocqueville ever really said it, the fact of the matter is he is credited with having said that the reason America is a great nation is because the American people are good people. And he concluded that if the American people ever cease to be good, America will cease to be great. And the fact of the matter is, this shutting down the government, not paying public servants, not giving vital services to people and communities who need them is demonstrative of the fact that Americans are losing their goodness. Let's not
Your time
do
has
that.
expired.
It will cause the greatness of this nation to be brought into danger. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Newhouse.
The gentleman from Washington is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the lady, my friend from Texas, for yielding. Madam Speaker, I rise on this first day of the 116th Congress with, frankly, a great deal of disappointment in my friends across the aisle. In the very first act of their new majority, Democrats have passed a set of rules to allow the debt limit to be raised automatically, to remove protections that prevent tax hikes on the American people, and to weaken the requirement that offsets be provided when federal spending is increased. It is clear my colleagues have chosen to focus more on tax and spend priorities rather than fiscal responsibility and accountability. As a part of this same first act, my friends across the aisle are now circumventing regular order and bringing new spending legislation straight to the floor for a vote with no opportunity for debate or ability to offer amendments. As someone who has served on both Rules and the Appropriations Committees, I've heard firsthand repeatedly from my colleagues across the aisle shout the importance of going through regular order and allowing debate and amendments on these bills. With this move today, the very first act in their majority, the Democrats are cutting the Rules and the Appropriations Committee completely out of the process. The legislation before us never had a hearing, was never marked up, never came to the Rules Committee for a vote. Most disappointingly, Democrats have negated the bills crafted carefully by the Appropriations Committee over the past year and thrown out legislative provisions that were negotiated and agreed upon by both sides of the aisle. Madam Speaker, I look forward to the opportunity to work to find common ground with my colleagues in the majority. But today I am sincerely disappointed in these first moves of the 116th Congress. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized. The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Missouri, Ms. Hartzler.
The gentlewoman from Missouri is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you much, Madam Speaker. I rise in opposition to H.R. 21, the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2019, for many reasons, but importantly, because the underlying legislation strips away essential protections for young mothers and unborn babies, disregarding the value of their lives. Today's minibus eliminates a crucial pro-life foreign policy that's in place today, known as the Protecting Life and Global Health Assistance Program. President Ronald Reagan instituted this policy to provide health care for women in foreign countries while ensuring that U.S. taxpayer dollars would not be used to fuel the international abortion industry. U.S. foreign assistance should be life-affirming. The Protecting Life and Global Health Assistance policy draws a clear line between abortion and global health care. Foreign non-governmental organizations should be eligible for U.S. federal funding as long as they do not perform or actively promote abortion as a method of birth control. Protecting Life and Global Health Assistance affirms the inherent worth and dignity of women and children around the world. And it is tragic that today's bill nullifies these pro-life protections. So because of that, I urge my colleagues to join me in voting against H.R. 21. I yield back.
The gentlewoman reserves.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lamborn.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady from Texas for her leadership. Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to H.R. 21, which repeals the Protecting Life and Global Health Assistance policy. This is a common sense policy that simply guarantees that U.S. taxpayer dollars do not promote or perform abortions overseas. Organizations such as International Planned Parenthood and Marie Stopes International are responsible for millions of abortions overseas every year, and they do not deserve support from American taxpayers. Taxpayer dollars are better spent on the health of children and mothers, on malaria and HIV prevention and treatment, rather than on snuffing out the lives of unborn children. It's amazing that on their first day of taking power, House Democrats are pushing an extreme position far to the left. American taxpayers simply don't want to fund abortions with their hard-earned dollars. And it's even more amazing that this exercise is being performed on a bill that will not be brought up in the Senate, and it will not be signed by the President. it is a bill that is going nowhere. I strongly oppose the repeal of this life-affirming provision, and I urge my colleagues to vote no on H.R. 21. Thank you, and I yield back.
I recognize the gentleman from Texas reserves.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Johnson.
The gentlewoman reserves.
Sorry.
Gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I just want to make something perfectly clear. The United States does not and cannot fund abortions. Let me say that again. The United States does not and cannot fund abortions, period. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Johnson.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady, and Madam Speaker, I rise to share a deep concern that I and many of my colleagues share about H.R. 21. If what our colleague said is true, then we should just take this provision out of the bill. To revise or rescind the Mexico City policy would do precisely the opposite of what you just said at the podium. In 1984, President Ronald Reagan made a strong international stance for life. He announced that the United States would carry on the tradition of protecting the innocent, not only at home, but around the globe. With this promise, the United States would no longer allow taxpayer dollars to be sent overseas to promote abortion as a method for family planning. That's what this policy does. We're thankful for the countless lives that have been saved because of President Reagan's willingness to embrace the innocent, and I remain thankful for President Trump for carrying on this proud legacy. Unfortunately, protecting life through global health assistance is now at risk. And the legislation before us today, the new Democratic leadership has moved to overturn this important policy that was just articulated. Let us say this clearly. The United States should never underwrite abortions. Taxpayers deserve better, children deserve better, and families deserve better. We must continue to be the shining light on the hill to protect the innocent and assist women and children in their time of need. What a shame it would be if the very first action in the 116th Congress is to send foreign aid to fund abortions overseas. I yield back.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized. The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from New York, from Texas, is recognized.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Banks.
The gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I too rise in strong opposition to the Consolidated Appropriations Act, H.R. 21. I am appalled that the very first initiative by this Democratic majority is to push for taxpayer-funded subsidies to international organizations that promote and perform abortions. Madam Speaker, this bill would repeal President Trump's Protecting Life and Global Health Assistance Policy, or the expanded Mexico City policy, which prohibits global health funding from going to foreign NGOs that perform or promote abortion. Madam Speaker, the expanded Mexico City policy does not change the amount of money available for global health and family planning programs. In fact, all qualified international family planning organizations are eligible for U.S. grant money if they agree to set conditions upon acceptance. The choice has been up to the NGO. Either agree not to perform or promote abortions or forego funding from the United States. And a 6-month review of the policy by the State Department found that out of 733 prime partners eligible for U.S. grant money, only 4 of them declined the conditions set by the expanded Mexico City policy. Madam Speaker, a vote in support of this minibus is a vote to abandon the principles of the U.S. foreign assistance that should be life-affirming. It should support the health of both women and children and unborn children. Abortion is not health care. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this bill and uphold the Protecting Life and Global Health Assistance policy. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized. The gentlewoman from New York reserves. The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to vote no on the bill before us today. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from Texas yields back. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, it is long past time to end the Trump shutdown. As our first legislative act of the year, we should isolate the political dispute over border security and reopen the government. There is simply no reason the Senate should not pass the package, given that they wrote the 6 full-year bills and passed a CR through February. I urge you to vote yes. I yield back the balance of my time.
All time for the debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 5, the previous question is ordered on the bill. The question is on encroachment in the third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill making appropriations for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2019, and for other purposes.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentlewoman opposed to the bill?
I am in its current form.
The gentlewoman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Ms. Granger of Texas moves to recommit the bill, H.R. 21, to the Committee on Appropriations with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment. Page 1021, strike line 15 and all that follows through page 1023, line 19, and redesignate subsequent sections accordingly.
The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, this is the final amendment to the bill, which will not kill the bill or send it back to committee. If adopted, the bill will immediately proceed to final passage as amended. This motion to recommit strikes the section of the Department of State and Foreign Operations Act that reverses the President's Protecting Life in Global Health Assistance policy, formerly known as the Mexico City policy. This policy is important to protect life and must be maintained. The bill also mandates that funds be made available for UNFPA, and this motion to recommit strikes that requirement. The administration has determined that this United Nations agency has violated certain provisions of law. No funds should go to UNFPA. We must support this motion to recommit and amend the bill before us to ensure that pro-life policies are maintained.
The gentlewoman kneels back. For what purpose does the
She's looking there. Isn't it me?
Does the gentlewoman from Texas seek to reclaim her time?
I apologize. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, my good friend.
The gentleman is recognized for 2
Madam
minutes.
Speaker, if reopening the government is the goal, if ending the shutdown is the goal, why does this appropriations package contain a brand new poison pill rider, Section 7071, that overturns a major, comprehensive, current-day pro-life policy? Let's be clear. The Protecting Life and Global Health Assistance policy is eviscerated by this bill. The Protecting Life policy, Madam Speaker, is a significant reiteration and expansion of President Ronald Reagan's Mexico City policy, which was first announced back in 1984. And that policy was and is designed to ensure that U.S. taxpayer money is not funneled to foreign non-governmental organizations that perform or promote abortion as a method of family planning. The policy done by Trump 2 years ago establishes pro-child safeguards that are benign and humane conditions. It's about protection of these innocent children who might otherwise die from chemical poisoning or by dismemberment. For years, pro-abortion organizations have used U.S. taxpayer funds to weaken, undermine, or reverse pro-life laws in other nations and destroy precious lives of these children. The speaker earlier today admonished us to protect God's creation. These unborn children are God's creation that cry out for our protection. U.S. foreign policy and the foreign entities that we fund with billions of dollars of tax money, grant money, this is grant money, should consistently affirm, care for, and tangibly assist women and children, including the unborn child. Let's not forget, no one is expendable or a throwaway. Every human life has infinite value. Birth is merely an event, not the beginning of life of a child, taxpayers should not be forced to fund the organizations that are promoting abortion overseas. This allows us, and it doesn't reduce global humanitarian aid, global health aid, by so much as $1. It just says who we give it to does matter. And if they have an agenda of taking the lives of these precious children, we would give it to someone else. And we do so on a dollar-for-dollar basis. I thank my good friend for yielding, and I hope that everyone will support the Granger motion to recommit.
The gentlewoman Speaker, from I Texas. urge my colleagues to vote in favor of this motion. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to the motion to recommit. Responsibly funding the federal government.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Responsibly funding the federal government is one of the most important duties of Congress. The previous majority failed to do so, and they failed to do the most basic task of keeping the lights on. Here on day one of the 116th Congress, we Democrats are here to reopen federal agencies shuttered by the Trump shutdown. This legislation, which has already garnered strong bipartisan support in the Senate, will ensure that the federal government is open and working for the American people. The House package includes the identical provisions relating to international family planning that were included in the state foreign operations bill that was reported unanimously by the Senate Appropriations Committee 6 months ago, including the aye votes by Senators McConnell and Graham. The bill continues the long-standing prohibition on the use of U.S. funds for abortion. The President's executive order goes beyond existing U.S. law and forces the United States to withhold critical family planning assistance from non-governmental organizations with expertise, capacity, proven track records on supporting women's health around the globe. The Mexico City policy, or the global gag rule, is a harmful policy that hurts women and families around the world. The President's expanded policy prevents women from around the world from gaining access to essential information and health care services. We are already on the 13th day of the Trump shutdown. We need to pass these bills without further delay. For that reason, Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to reject this motion to recommit and vote no.
Without objection, the gentlewoman yields back.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Without objection, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. The noes have it. The motion is not adopted.
Speaker, I ask for the yeas and nays. Yes and nays. Yes.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number have risen. The yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. they're both California. But there's nobody over. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 5, I call up HJ Resolution 1 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the joint resolution.
House Joint Resolution 1, joint resolution making further continuing appropriations for the Department of Homeland Security for fiscal year 2019 and for other purposes.
Pursuant to House Resolution 5, the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Rayball Allard, and the gentlewoman from Texas, Mrs. Granger, will each control 15 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Rayball Allard.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend the remarks and include extraneous material on the measure under consideration.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, today is the beginning of the 116th Congress. The first and most basic responsibility this House has is to reopen our government to serve the needs of the American people. The greatest obstacle in keeping the government open has been disagreements on how to spend Homeland Security dollars. That is why, in the best interests of the country, it makes sense to reopen the government by passing the remaining 6 bipartisan funding bills for fiscal year 2019 and to reopen the Department of Homeland Security through a short-term continuing resolution. The resolution before us would do just that. It would reopen the Department of Homeland Security through February 8th of this year. This would give us time to negotiate a DHS funding bill for the rest of the fiscal year based on the most current needs assessment, such as meeting the health needs of children in border custody. The ability to reach a full-year funding bill for the Department of Homeland Security will not be possible, however, if the President is unwilling to change his focus from a campaign promise to one that realistically addresses the most urgent and immediate national security vulnerabilities our homeland faces today. This means any serious discussion of Homeland Security investments must include funding for hiring more law enforcement agents to focus on opioid, gang, trade, and child exploitation investigations, funding for the hiring of additional custom officers to intercept illicit drugs and other contraband, almost all of which comes into our country through the ports of entry. It must also include investing more in first responder grants to better prepare states and localities to prevent and respond to terrorism and disasters of every kind. And it must contain funding for the recapitalization of the Coast Guard's air and sea fleets, including funding for the procurement of our first heavy icebreaker since the 1970s. Because as the Arctic ice recedes, Russia, China, and other countries are winning the race to lay claim to the vast resources of that region. While border security is important, it is only one of many pieces of the Homeland Security mission, which includes criminal investigations, first responder preparedness, disaster response, the protection of our cyber networks, and the protection of our critical infrastructure, coastal waters, and our air and surface transportation systems. These must also be funding priorities if we are to protect our homeland. Yet every dollar set aside for a border wall is a dollar lost to our ability to meet these and our other most pressing and critical homeland security needs. I urge my House colleagues to support this resolution, and I urge the Senate to do the same so we can quickly get to work on negotiating a full-year funding bill in support of the critical work of the Department of Homeland Security.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, today I rise in opposition to H.J. Res. 1. Again, this bill put forward by the new Democrat leadership fails to secure our border. The President has said that he will not sign it. The Senate says they will not consider it. This plan ignores one of the main responsibilities of the Congress, which is to protect the American people. Every day there are an average of 2,100 illegal crossings at our southern border. According to the Department of Homeland Security, over 17,000 criminals were apprehended at the border last year. From human traffickers to drug smugglers to suspected terrorists, these criminal illegal immigrants represent a clear threat to the safety and security of our homeland. The situation at the border is a crisis, not only for border states like my home state of Texas, but for our entire country. We owe it to the American people to work together to address this problem and secure our border. As the leader of the Speaker's working group on the border crisis in 2014, I had the opportunity to travel multiple times to our southern border and to the countries where the majority of unaccompanied minors was coming from. Not only did I talk to the leadership of each country, but I talked with many of the people who are sending their children to the United States. In addition to the crime and violence created by the cartels, I was told time and time again that the reason people and children were risking their lives to come to the United States was because of the lack of enforcement of our immigration laws and our unsecure borders. In order to discourage people from taking the treacherous and often deadly trip to the United States, it's vital that they know that we will enforce our immigration laws and the border is secure. It's time to end the political gamesmanship and get to work on a bill that will reopen the government and fund border security. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman California is recognized.
Madam Chair, how much time do I have remaining?
The gentlewoman has 11 minutes remaining.
I yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, the chairman of the Committee on Homeland Security.
The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the chair lady's recognition. Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of the new Democratic majority's efforts to reopen the Department of Homeland Security. Since the government shut down on December 21st, roughly 2.5 million holiday travelers each day have passed through airport security checkpoints staffed by transportation security officers who aren't getting paid. As we speak, 87% of the DHS workforce is reporting to work without pay and without knowing when the next paycheck will come. These are fellow Americans with bills to pay and families to support. The President should not be treating them like pawns in his pathetic pursuit to fulfill an absurd campaign promise. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert in the record a New York Times article dated January 3rd.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, I've served on this committee since its inception and have spent over a decade working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to identify and invest in effective ways to secure the border. That is why I find the President's bizarre obsession with wasting billions of dollars on building a wall so confounding. There's absolutely no evidence that a wall spanning the U.S.-Mexico border will make America safer. While I'm at it, there's similarly no evidence that separating children from their families or implementing harsh asylum restrictions make America safer either. But the Trump administration has forced DHS to pursue such cruel, costly, and inhumane policies too. The kinds of threats America faces today transcend physical borders. The President needs to learn that and adjust his priorities accordingly. Last fall, Secretary Nielsen declared that cyber attacks and sophisticated hacking are the biggest threats to the United States. Yet today, almost half the cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency workforce is furloughed, and the rest are working without pay because the president is fixated on his wall. According to one official, CISA has ceased a variety of critical cybersecurity and infrastructure protection capabilities. I'm disturbed that the president does not appear to understand that his actions have stalled progress on securing vulnerable networks. Moreover, the uncertainty as to when workers will be paid is also counterproductive. Madam Speaker, I'm disappointed that we are forced to spend the first days of the 116th Congress on the unfinished business of the 115th Congress instead of addressing priorities the American elected us to tackle in November. But this is where we find ourselves.
The gentleman's time has expired.
15 seconds.
Okay.
Thank you.
I yield additional 15 seconds.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much. But this is where we find ourselves. The American public needs Congress to be the grown-ups in the room. I urge my colleagues to support this short-term spending bill so we can pay the DHS employees charged with protecting the homeland. And I yield back.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Fleischman.
The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to our distinguished ranking member, Ms. Granger. Madam Speaker, I respectfully and strongly rise today in strong opposition to the proposal from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to reopen the government without increased funding for border security. Let me be clear. This attempt to reopen our government without increased border security funding is dangerous, flawed, and truly puts party before country. We can all agree that our country is in crisis, as our porous southern border allows dangerous criminals, deadly drugs, and human trafficking to pour into our country almost unchecked. So why do my colleagues on the other side of the aisle continue to refuse to take real action and do something about it? Just the other day, there was another tragedy where the police reported an individual who had come here illegally took the life of a police officer. That police officer left his family as a patriotic American, dedicated to enforcing the rule of law, and as a result, lost his life. How many more times does this have to happen before my colleagues on the other side of this aisle support increased border security? In short, we need the wall. Madam Speaker, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle say that walls don't work. Let me assure you they do. According to the Department of Homeland Security, there have been significant decreases along our southern border where walls and fencing have been built. Look at Yuma, Arizona, where illegal traffic has dropped 95% over 9 years. El Paso, Texas, where illegal traffic has dropped 72% in 1 year alone and over 95% in 22 years. Madam Speaker, House Republicans took a stand on December 5th to secure our nation by passing a bill which included $5.7 billion in border security. That was the President's full request for the wall. This bill is central to fulfilling our promise as elected officials to protect the American people, ensure the safety of our nation, and put American interests first. To reopen the government without necessary border security funding and wall funding is a sorely missed opportunity. Madam Speaker, let's get back to work negotiating and take up legislation that secures our southern border, funds the wall, and strengthens our nation. I yield back.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cuellar, a longtime member of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Homeland Security.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I also thank our chairwoman for yielding to me. Look, everybody talks about the border and how violent it is, but if you look at the latest FBI statistics, whether it's rape, murder, or assault, the border crime rate is lower than the national crime rate. And I can pick any city that you want to, and you will see that none of the most dangerous cities in the country are on the border. None of them. None of them are. And in fact, if you look at my hometown of Laredo, the murder rate here in the border, and you compare it to Washington, D.C., where we're at, it's about 3 or 4 times higher here in Washington, D.C. So if people are worried about the crime, start off with Washington, D.C., if that's what y'all want to do. The wall is a 14th century solution to a 21st century issue that we have. We want to see strong border security. I live on the border. I don't just go visit for a second or 2 hours and say that I know the border better. I know what works down there, and the wall is a 14th century solution. If you want to spend billions of dollars on a wall, I will spend $100 on a ladder that will take care of that wall. And this is why we got to make sure that we spend money on Border Patrol. We're 2,000 Border Patrol short. And in fact, if we spend money on retention so we can keep them, we don't have to lose them. We're losing Border Patrol right now. But we can't spend it the wrong way. The administration just spent $14.8 million to hire 2 Border Patrol. Now, maybe one of them is Captain America. I don't know. But are we going to spend $15 million to hire 2 Border Patrol? Spend that money on bonuses. Give them the equipment that we have. Protect private property rights on the border so we can go ahead and do that. If you want to stop drugs, look at the latest DA report, and you will see that the latest DA report will tell you that drugs come in through ports of entry. So you can put the most beautiful wall, and they're going to come in through a port of entry. Put money on the ports of entry. Put money on CBP facilities and the facilities that we need. Finally, the last thing I want to say is this. There is technology that works for the military. And if it works for the military, we can certainly use it on the border. Personnel, technology, we just got to look at the right way of securing the border. I want to work with you. We want to work with you. But the wall is a 14th century solution. We can do better than that. Madam Speaker, I yield the balance of my time. Thank you so much.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Rice.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is true that about 30% of the government is shut down. We are in a standoff here, and why is that? What's the purpose of this? It's because of 2 scourges on our country that have been brought on by our poor southern border, and that is illegal immigration and opioid deaths. And my constituents have had enough. The House Republicans passed a spending bill just a few weeks ago that included $5.7 billion that would go a long way towards securing our southern border and easing these disasters. Now the Democrats take charge, and the first thing they do is introduce a bill that eliminates that spending for border security. With respect to illegal immigration, hundreds of thousands of illegal aliens cross our southern border every year. This limitless supply of cheap labor unfairly competes for jobs and holds down wages for hardworking, law-abiding Americans. The most affected are the most vulnerable at the bottom of the income ladder. The American middle class is smaller and makes the same money as it did in 1990 today. That's right, until Donald Trump came along, the American middle class hadn't had a raise in 25 years. And cheap labor from illegal aliens breaking our laws every year to cheat American workers is one of the primary causes. Mr. Speaker, my friends on the other side of the aisle love to complain about income inequality. Well, here's a chance to stop complaining and actually do something about income inequality. If you truly want to give the middle class a raise, let's stop the endless flow of illegal labor that cheats our middle class. Let's restore the $5.7 billion to secure our southern border and stop the flow of cheap illegal labor and watch wages rise. With respect to opioids, the scourge of opioid deaths is not new. but it is exploding in America as gangs and drug cartels become more adept at exploiting our porous southern border for fantastic profits. But these criminal profits come at great cost for honest, hardworking people, both in Central and South America and here in the United States. In 2017, 70,000 people died from opioid overdoses. That's up 45% in 1 year. 132 of these Americans killed by drugs were in my district, and they're in your districts too. If you want to argue about who caused the shutdown, I don't care who caused the shutdown. What I care about is 70,000 Americans are killed by opioids, most of which come across our southern border. My law enforcement tells me 85% of those drugs killing my constituents and yours come across our southern border. That 70,000 Americans killed by drug overdoses is more than traffic deaths, 37,000, and homicides, 17,000 combined. More than traffic deaths and homicides combined. And most of these drugs killing your constituents are coming across our southern border. Mr. Speaker, the Democrats say they're for border security, but they take no action. Empty words. They strip the funding from the spending bill. They want to argue about who's to blame for the shutdown. Go home and tell that to a family that lost a loved one from opioids because you've refused to take action to secure our southern border. Empty words. Funny, Mr. Schumer voted in favor of a border wall in 2006. Why is he against it now? Because Mr. Trump wants it? Empty words. It's time to stop the finger pointing and do something to truly help our constituents. Let's help the middle class by ending unfair competition from illegal aliens. Can I have 30 more seconds? 30 more
The gentleman is recognized.
I yield 30 seconds.
Let's reduce opioid deaths by ending the flow of deadly drugs from Mexico. Let's restore the $5.7 billion that Homeland Security says they need to finally secure our southern border. Mr. Speaker, the Democrats are terribly worried about who gets blamed for the shutdown. Frankly, I don't care who gets blamed. This is a fight to keep drugs off our streets and out of the hands of our children. It's a fight to keep our communities safe. It's a fight for higher wages for hardworking Americans. It's a fight worth having. I yield back.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2.5 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Ruppersberger, another longtime member of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Homeland Security.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 2.5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I rise in support of House Joint Resolution 1, which makes continuing appropriations for the Department of Homeland Security. As a matter of principle, I don't like continuing resolutions. Stopgap bills provide funding at current levels only. They prevent new spending where needed and prolong programs that have been discontinued. And last, Band-Aid budgets are bad for everyone, the American taxpayers and especially those on the front lines, tasked with protecting the homeland. But today, the 13th day of this senseless government shutdown, the administration has tied our hands in demanding more than $5 million for his president's campaign pledge, a border wall that really does not work. I'm a member of the Appropriations Homeland Security Subcommittee. When we met with the previous head of the Border Patrol, Ronald Vitillo, we asked, how much time does the physical wall buy you? His answer, and I quote, was, quote, a few minutes to a few seconds. What we need is more manpower. Last year, there were more than 800 vacancies for Border Patrol officers at checkpoints in Laredo, Tucson, and San Diego alone. They are working triple overtime there. So our tax dollars could be better spent investing in more Customs and Border Patrol officers, more immigration judges, and by leveraging the fruits of modern technology such as new communication towers, state-of-the-art cameras, drones, all-terrain vehicles, and fencing where appropriate. Brick and mortar walls are a 4th century solution to a 21st century problem. We also need President Trump to stop leading by fear and falsehoods as it relates to his border wall issue. The real problem is undocumented immigrants overstaying their visas, which constitutes well over half of those here illegally, and those are facts. Most of the drugs entering our country are coming through official land, air, and sea ports of entry. I represent one of those ports, the Port of Baltimore. In electing 60 new Democrats to Congress, the American people have rejected this willy-nilly style of governance and are demanding a return to common sense governing. No, we don't want open borders. Yes, we can do better when it comes to border security, but we must do it strategically. This continuing resolution gives us 30 days to debate funding levels for border security, including physical enhancements. It is identical to legislation already passed by our colleagues in the Senate just a few weeks ago. I urge my colleagues to support, and I yield the balance of my time. I yield the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
I continue to reserve my time.
The gentlewoman reserves her time. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, Democrats made a pledge to the American people, and we're here at 8:50 in the evening making good on our pledge to the American people to open the government by funding certain appropriations up until September 30th, and by opening the government by extending Homeland Security funding until February 8th, to make sure that the TSOs, the Border Patrol, the CBPs are all being paid. How many of you go through the airports and go through security? Do you realize that those TSOs are not being paid? And my commitment to them as I traveled here to Washington is that you need to be paid, not because you're not great public servants, because it's a shame. And so I come today to say, do what is right, not for party, but for the American people. The president indicated, I will build a great, great wall on our southern border, and Mexico will pay for it. Where's the Mexico funding? Today I introduced a bill, no funding for the wall, Mexico will pay for it. And so it is extremely important to recognize our duty, and our duty is to fund this government. But I also want to give a constitutional lesson, if I might. Article 1 is the Congress, Article 2 is the executive. We work together. We don't have dictates from the executive to tell Congress what is best to do for the American people. Pay our federal workers so that jobs can get done, so that there's that rubbish and trash and disaster on the mall that is so beautiful. And what is this breaking news? Again, the misuse of the military. Trump administration wants to send more troops to the border, not for protecting the border with Mexico, but to add 160 miles of wire. I just came from the border on Saturday. I wanted to say what I know. I go to the border almost all the time through the years that I've been on Homeland Security. And I talk to the Border Patrol agents. And they don't want a concrete wall. But I tell you what they need. They don't need a table with a Coast Guard doctor sitting on. Yep.
I give the gentlelady 30 seconds more.
Thank you.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 3 seconds.
I thank the Speaker. They don't want a table, four-legged table, with Pepto-Bismol on the table and one doctor. They don't want a room of individuals who would have a sign that says flu room. They don't want the innocent children and families coming across who are now condemned that they're coming across misrepresenting and they're fleeing bloodshed and persecution. And the dominant numbers who are coming across the border are women and children of families. We're a big enough nation to have a resolution through real border security, to the technology, to personnel, to individuals at the ports of entry, CBP. We know how to do this, and all we need to do is sit down and do it. That is why we need the bills that are on the floor, Madam Speaker. Open the government now and vote for these bills. I yield back.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to vote no on this bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I urge my House colleagues to support this resolution and the critical work of the Department of Homeland Security. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 5, the previous question is ordered on the joint resolution. The question is on the encroachment in the third reading of the joint resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
Joint resolution making further continuing appropriations for the Department of Homeland Security for fiscal year 2019 and for other purposes.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentlewoman opposed to the joint resolution?
I am in its current form.
The gentlewoman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Ms. Granger of Texas moves to recommit the joint resolution, House Joint Resolution 1, to the Committee on Appropriations.
Gentlewoman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, the bills that House Democrats have chosen to consider today are not in keeping with the months of good faith negotiations to resolve the differences between the House, the Senate, and the White House. More importantly, they fail to truly address the crisis on our southern border and the very real threat it poses to the safety and security of our homeland. We owe it to the American people to work together to address this problem and secure our border. It's time to reopen the government and fund border security. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the motion to recommit.
The gentlewoman yields. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to the motion to recommit. This shutdown has gone on.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
This shutdown has gone on long enough. This motion to recommit would only further prolong the shutdown. We need to pass HJ Res 1 immediately to ensure that all components of our Department of Homeland Security are open and functional to protect the American people. Madam Speaker, for those reasons, I urge my colleagues to oppose the motion to recommit. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back without objection. The previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The noes have it. The motion is not adopted.
Madam Speaker, I ask for the yeas and nays.
The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized. The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number have risen. The yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 and Clause 9 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on the motion to recommit will be followed by a 5-minute vote on the passage of the joint resolution, if ordered, the motion to recommit on H.R. 21, and the passage of H.R. 21. This is a 15-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 197 and the nays are 233, with no one answering present. The motion is not adopted. The question is on the passage of the joint resolution. Those in favor, please say yay. Those opposed, say nay. The yeas have it. The bill is passed.
Madam Speaker,
The
I ask for a
gentlewoman from
recorded
Texas
vote.
is recognized.
I ask for a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A significant number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Member will record their votes by electronic device. 5-minute vote. On this vote, the ayes are 239 and the nays are 192. The joint resolution is passed. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The unfinished business is the question on agreeing to the motion to recommit on H.R. 21, offered by the gentlewoman from Texas, Mrs. Granger, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will redesignate the motion.
Motion to recommit on H.R. 21 offered by Ms. Granger of Texas.
The question is on agreeing to the motion to recommit. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 199 and the nays are 232. The motion is not adopted. The question is on the passage of the bill under Clause 10 of Rule 20. The yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote. I hit this? On this vote, the yeas are 241 and the nays are 190. The bill is passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I offer a resolution and ask unanimous consent for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 9, resolution resolved that pursuant to the Legislative Pay Act of 1929, as amended, the 6 minority employees authorized therein shall be the following named persons effective January 3rd, 2019 until otherwise ordered by the House, to wit, Barrett Carr, James Min, Will Dunham, Matt Sparks, Caleb Smith, and Natalie Joyce, each to receive gross compensation pursuant to the provisions of House Resolution 119, 95th Congress, as enacted into permanent law by Section 115 of Public Law 95-94. In addition, the minority leader may appoint and set the annual rate of pay for up to 3 further minority employees.
Is there an objection to the consideration of the resolution? Without objection, the resolution is agreed to, and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I offer a privileged resolution and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 10, resolved that unless otherwise ordered, the hour of daily meeting of the House shall be 2 p.m. on Mondays, noon on Tuesdays, or 2 p.m. if no legislative business was conducted on the preceding Monday, noon on Wednesdays and Thursdays, and 9 a.m. on all other days of the week.
Without objection, the resolution is agreed to, and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purposes does the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Govern, seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I offer a privileged concurrent resolution and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the concurrent resolution.
House Concurrent Resolution 1.
Next to me. Shh.
The clerk will report the concurrent resolution.
House Concurrent Resolution 1, resolved that pursuant to Clause 4, Section 5, Article 1 of the Constitution, during the 116th Congress, the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader of the Senate, or their respective designees, acting jointly after consultation with the Minority Leader of the House and the Minority Leader of the Senate, may notify the members of the House and the Senate, respectively, to assemble at a place outside the District of Columbia if, in their opinion, the public interest shall warrant it.
Without objection, the current resolution is agreed to, and the motion to recommit is laid on the table. For what purposes does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that during the 116th Congress, the Speaker, the Majority Leader, and Minority Leader be authorized to accept resignations and to make appointments authorized by law or by the House.
Without objection, so ordered. For what purposes does the gentleman from Maryland seek
Madam
recognition?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that during the 116th Congress, all members be permitted to extend their remarks and to include extraneous material within the permitted limit in that section of the record entitled Extension of Remarks.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker.
For the purposes, for purpose, I'm sorry.
Madam Speaker, I rise to ask unanimous consent that during the first session of the 116th Congress, one, on legislative days of Monday or Tuesday, when the House convenes pursuant to House Resolution 10, the House shall convene 2 hours earlier than the time otherwise established by the resolution for the purpose of conducting morning hour debate. 2, on legislative days of Wednesday or Thursday, when the House convenes pursuant to House Resolution 10, the House shall convene 2 hours earlier than the time otherwise established by the resolution for the purpose of conducting morning hour debate. 3, When the House convenes pursuant to an order other than House Resolution 10, the House shall convene for the purpose of conducting morning hour debate only as described by such order. 4, the time for morning hour debate shall be allocated equally between the parties and may not continue beyond 10 minutes before the hour appointed for the resumption of the session of the House. And 5, the form of proceeding for morning hour debate shall be as follows. A, the prayer by the chaplain, the approval of the journal, and the pledge of the allegiance to the flag shall be postponed until resumption of the session of the House. B, initial and subsequent recognitions for debate shall alternate between parties. C, recognition shall be conferred by the Speaker only pursuant to lists submitted by the Majority Leader and by the Minority Leader. D, no member may address the House for longer than 5 minutes except the Majority Leader, the Minority Leader, or the Minority Whip. No legislative business shall be in order except the filing of privileged reports. And F, following morning hour debate, the chair shall declare a recess pursuant to Clause 12A of the Rule 1 until the time appointed for the resumption of the session of the House. And 6, the Speaker may dispense with morning hour debate upon receipt of a notification described in Clause 12C of Rule 1 or upon a change in reconvening pursuant to Clause 12E of Rule 1 and notify members accordingly.
The gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Your committee appointed on the part of the House to join a like committee on the part of the Senate to notify the President of the United States that a quorum of each House has been assembled and is ready to receive any communication that he may be pleased to make has performed that duty. Done.
The chair announces the Speaker's appointment pursuant to Clause 11 of Rule 2, Clause 11 of Rule 1, and the order of the House of today of the following members of the House to the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence.
Mr. Schiff of California, Chairman. Mr. Nunes of California.
The chair announces the Speaker's appointment pursuant to 2 U.S.C. 2001 in the order of the House of today. Of the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer, and the gentleman from California, Mr. McCarthy, as members of the House Office Building Commission to serve with the Speaker. The chair announces the Speaker's appointment pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 2 and the order of the House of today of Mr. Douglas N. Letter as General Counsel of the United States House of Representatives. The chair announces that the Speaker has delivered to the clerk a letter dated January the 3rd, 2019, listing members in the order in which each shall act as Speaker pro tempore under Clause 8B3 of Rule 1. Chair leaves for the House of Communication.
The Honorable the Clerk, House of Representatives, Madam, I hereby designate Representative Steny Hoyer of Maryland to exercise any authority regarding assembly, reassembly, convening, or reconvening of the House pursuant to House Concurrent Resolution 1, Clause 12 of Rule 1, and any concurrent resolutions of the current Congress as may contemplate my designation of members to exercise similar authority. In the event of the death or inability of that designee, the alternate members of the House listed in the letter bearing this date that I have placed with the clerk are designated in turn for the same purposes. Signed, best regards, Nancy Pelosi, Speaker.
The chair leaves for the House of Communications.
The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives, Madam, under Clause 2G of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, I herewith designate Mr. Robert Reeves, Deputy Clerk, and Mr. Christopher Danesa, Legal Counsel, to sign any and all papers and do all other acts for me under the name of the Clerk of the House, which they would be otherwise authorized to do by virtue of this designation, except such as are provided by statute, in case of my temporary absence or disability. This designation shall remain in effect for the 116th Congress or until modified by me. With best wishes, I am, signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas, Clerk of the House.
The chair customarily takes this occasion at the onset of a Congress to announce policies with respect to particular aspects of the legislative process. The chair will insert in the record announcements concerning, first, privileges of the floor. Second, introduction of bills and resolutions. Third, unanimous consent requests for the consideration of legislation. Fourth, recognition for 1-minute speeches. Fifth, recognition for special order speeches. Sixth, decorum in debate. Seventh, conduct of votes by electronic device. Eighth, use of handouts on the House floor. Ninth, use of electronic equipment on the House floor. And 10th, use of the chamber. These announcements, where appropriate, will reiterate the origins of the stated policy. The chair intends to continue in the 116th Congress the policies reflected in these statements. The policy announced in the 102nd Congress with respect to the jurisdictional concepts related to Clauses 5A of Rule 21 - Tax and Tariff Measures will continue to govern but need not be reiterated, as it is adequately documented as precedent in the House Rules and Manual. Without objection, these announcements will be printed in the record. Under Clause 5D of Rule 20, the chair announces to the House that the whole number of the House is 433. For what purpose does the gentleman from Vermont request?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do now adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow.